Hey everyone, Nicole Steckline, Technical Agronomist for DeKalb and Asgrow in Northeast Iowa. We've got some corn coming out of the ground and some of it even looks pretty good. Just in time for Nicole to come by, drop a video, and dash your dreams across the rocks. Well, I'm not here to do that. I do want to give you guys a little bit of insight as what I foresee as the next obstacle for this corn crop. So just as a breakdown of what I'm seeing for planting dates and stand establishment, the corn that was planted before Easter through about the 24th of April is probably having the hardest time getting a good stand established and getting a good stand count. The stuff that was planted the 25th and the 26th, so closer to that April 27th snow, actually has a higher stand count and a much more consistent stand throughout the field. My theory on that is the stuff that was planted earlier into those warm soils had enough time to imbibe water and initiate germination, and then it sat. While the stuff that was planted closer to the snow never even started. So it didn't have to start, stop, and start again and use up those carbohydrates while it was just sitting there. It was able to just start, gain some GDUs, and emerge out of the ground, although rather slowly. So when it comes to the earlier planted corn, my major concern right now is to hopefully keep the stand that we've got and not have any die-off from seedling diseases. So my first concern is that our fungicides on this seed are really only meant to last for 3 weeks. And in a normal spring, 3 weeks should be plenty of time to get that corn seedling out of the ground and get it some growth and almost to the point where it's got some nodal roots on it to where we shouldn't need it. However, this year, a lot of these corn plants, this field was planted April 20th, a lot of this corn sat there for 4 weeks. So by the time it got to the surface, the fungicide effectiveness has basically been gone. So sitting in cool, wet soils this past month is at a very high risk for seedling diseases. So what the seedling disease is, it's going to basically cut out the mesocotyle and rot that out. So now it's time for a little bit of corn plant anatomy and physiology. So we've got our corn seed here, and the first thing that corn seed is going to do when it imbibes water is shoot out the radical root. After it shoots out the radical root, which is responsible for bringing water and nutrients to the young growing plant, it will initiate the coleoptile to start growing towards the surface. Soon after the coleoptile starts to grow towards the surface, we get seminal root development. So these are really the root system for that young plant to bring in water and nutrients before we get our nodal root development at about V3 to V4. So this plant is at the V3 stage. So if we use the collar method for staging, we do count this first leaf here. So we've got one collar, we've got two collars, and then we've got our third right here. This plant here in a couple days this next leaf will have a collar on it and it will be at V4. But since we did get to V3, we've got this nodal root system. But before we get to this point, this young corn plant is going to be relying on the radical and seminal root system to bring the young corn plant nutrients and water both from the soil and whatever stored carbohydrates are in the seed through the mesocotyle to the plant. If this mesocotyle is damaged and killed by insects or seedling diseases, it's going to starve this plant out if we don't have our nodal roots set. Add to that the fact that once this corn did get to the surface, we had very slow GDU accumulation. So it continued to use up any leftover available seed stores while it wasn't actually developing because of a lack of GDUs. So it's going to take this corn crop that was planted earlier much longer to get to a point where it doesn't rely on that mesocotyle and the seed and the primary root system to feed it. So that's kind of my biggest concern right now, past getting a good stand established and whether we have to replant or not. That's my biggest concern on this early planted corn. So those of us who didn't get it planted in May, in April, the first week of May was really our next planting window. So if you didn't plant in April, it kind of came down to darned if you do, darned if you don't. And if you don't, it's probably still in the bag. I'm not going to make anybody feel bad for any planting decisions that they made this year because of that fact. There were very few ideal days to plant in Northeast Iowa this year. So the stand counts that I'm finding in the May planted corn are actually really good, because when we planted, it got some warmth, it got some moisture, and it was able to come up out of the ground. So you won't have to worry quite as much about the seedling disease coming in on the May planted corn. However, like I said before, we were pushing conditions. So it's a very, very high probability that we're going to have quite a few acres sitting there with some sidewall compaction. So once again, it turns to this very critical time frame of V3 to V4 to make sure that we get the nodal roots set and developed where they need to be. And that sidewall compaction, especially if it gets dry and hot, it's going to make those sidewalls much harder to penetrate with these small young nodal roots. So then if we do get hot and dry, if we've got sidewall compaction, a lot of times that furrow is going to open up and it's going to dry out these nodal roots and keep it from developing. So then we'll have a corn plant where the top is outgrowing the root system and they aren't developed, and it won't be able to withstand any short-term drought conditions. So even if we have a week of hot and dry, if we can't penetrate the soil with these nodal roots early on because of sidewall compaction, this young corn plant is going to feel it much worse than any stuff that was planted in April that didn't have the sidewall compaction. Looking forward as well is that if we go ahead and spray like a growth regulator herbicide without having a good nodal root development, there's also a higher chance that it's going to get floppy because it's not going to be able to grow out of it. So that's all of the good news that I've got for you guys today. As always, call, text, or email with questions.